we are on the fourth and final step in creating the production cost report. Assigning costs to the units that were completed and transferred out, and the units that are unfinished, which of course are called the ending work in process units. For our T account, we have already figured out the number of units completed and transferred out, and the number of incomplete units still in process at the end of the period. But to do the journal entries, we need the dollar amounts of the costs, not the quantity of units. Remember, the main goal of the production cost report is to take the costs that were associated with the beginning work in process units, plus additional costs associated with the units that were transferred in this period. The costs are direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, and split them between the completed units, which were transferred out, and the incomplete units that are still in process at the end of the period. So the production cost report requires a lot of calculations to determine the costs for the completed and transferred out units and the ending work in process units. As mentioned before, the cutting department is the second process. Therefore, this time there are transferred in units and costs from the previous process. So we start with this column. To calculate the transferred in costs associated with the completed and transferred out units, we simply take the 38,000 equivalent units of production for transferred in units and multiply by the $4.40 cost per equivalent unit. Here's the calculation. The result of $167,200 is the transferred in costs associated with the units that were completed and transferred out of the cutting department. To calculate the transferred in costs associated with the ending work in process units, we simply take the 7,000 equivalent units of production for transferred in units and multiply by the $4.40 cost per equivalent unit. Here's the calculation. The result of $30,800 is transferred in costs associated with the units that are incomplete and still in ending work in process inventory for the cutting department. This gives us a total of $198,000 of transferred in costs that have been accounted for. Obviously, this was obtained by adding $167,200 and $30,800. To check your work, make sure the costs to account for is the same amount as the costs accounted for. They must be the same. Next, we move on to the direct materials column. To calculate the direct material costs associated with the completed and transferred out units, we simply take the 38,000 equivalent units of production for direct materials and multiply it by the 50-cent cost per equivalent unit. Here's the calculation. The result of $19,000 is the direct materials costs associated with the units that were completed and transferred out of the cutting department. To calculate the direct materials costs associated with the ending work in process units, we simply take the 0 equivalent units of production for direct materials and multiply by the 50-cent cost per equivalent unit. Here's the calculation. The result of 0 is the direct materials costs associated with the units that are incomplete and still in ending work in process inventory for the cutting department. This makes sense since these units are not finished. They haven't been put into the puzzle box, which is the only direct material for the cutting process, and the box is only added at the very end of the process. This gives us a total of $19,000 of direct materials that have been accounted for. To check your work, make sure the direct materials costs to account for is the same as the direct materials cost accounted for. They must be the same. Next, we move on to the conversion costs column. To calculate the conversion costs associated with the completed and transferred out units, we simply take the 38,000 equivalent units of production for conversion costs and multiply it by the 40-cent cost per equivalent unit. And here's the calculation. The result of $15,200 is the conversion costs associated with the units that were completed and transferred out of the cutting department. Remember, conversion costs are direct labor plus manufacturing overhead. To calculate the conversion costs associated with the ending work in process units, we simply take the 2,100 equivalent units of production for conversion costs and multiply by the 40-cent cost per equivalent unit. Here's the calculation. The result of $840 is the conversion costs associated with the units that are incomplete and still in ending work in process inventory for the cutting department. This gives us a total of $840 of conversion costs that have been accounted for. To check your work, make sure the conversion costs to account for is the same amount as the conversion costs accounted for. They must be the same. Now we can finish the production cost report for the cutting department. The only thing we have left is the total cost column. This will just involve basic arithmetic. To calculate the total cost for completed and transferred out units, we simply add the transferred in costs, direct materials, and conversion costs to arrive at $201,400. To calculate the total cost for the ending work in process units, we once again add the transferred in costs, direct materials, and conversion costs, with the result being $31,640. Then to calculate the total costs accounted for, we can either add $201,400 plus $31,640 to get the $233,040 of total costs accounted for, or we can use the previous method and add the transferred in costs, direct materials, and conversion costs to arrive at the same $233,040. As a final check of your work, make sure the total cost to account for is the same as the total costs accounted for. They must be the same. So finally, we know how much cost to assign to the units transferred out because they are completed for this process, and units still in process. These are incomplete for this process. First, for the 38,000 puzzles completed and transferred out, we now know they cost us $201,400. Later, this number will be a credit in a journal entry to show how much was transferred out of this account. And for the 7,000 incomplete puzzles still in the process at the end of the counting period, they cost $31,640. So the production cost report was a lot of calculations to obtain these two numbers. Another very critical number is the final cost per equivalent unit. In this case, it's $5.30. What this number means is that each puzzle costs Peggy $5.30 to make. Notice this final number has to come from the last process, which in this case is the cutting department. And this $5.30 includes the cost from the previous process that were transferred in. So it's a lot of calculations to figure out that each puzzle costs $5.30 to make. But now Peggy knows she has to charge more than that to earn a gross profit.